So I'm going to talk about some basics of conversational UI. I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of creating a project with Dialogflow. I'm going to talk about a lot of the terminology, some basics of fulfillment with Drupal, and basically that two-way conversation. So both Dialogflow talking to Drupal and Drupal talking back to Dialogflow. But first, I'm going to try a live demo. What could possibly go wrong, right? Okay, so if I could just turn this on. So I've got
the mic's back on.
I've got a Google Home device here.
The mic's off.
Google Home Mini. Here goes.
The mic's back on.
Okay, Google, talk to DrupalSouth.
All right, let's get the test version of DrupalSouth.
Hey, I'm the DrupalSouth 2017 bot. I can help you find out about the session schedule, speakers and the venue. Try what sessions are on Thursday morning or what sessions are there from Spark Interactive. For room info, try where is the loft room. If you get stuck, you can ask for help at any time.
What Docker sessions are there on Friday morning?
There is only one session that matches called Sailing with Kubernetes and Drupal 8. Would you like to know more details or the speaker or room?
Yeah, what room is that in?
Sure, that session is in the loft room at 11:10 a.m. on Friday.
Yeah, who's the speaker?
Here is what I have on the speaker, Nicholas Schuck. Nick is a developer who is passionate about both Drupal and Kubernetes. This unique mix of communities and languages has allowed him to work on interesting problems with deployment, scale, and testing.
Banana.
You're currently finding information about sailing with Kubernetes and Drupal 8. I'm not sure what you're asking me. You can ask for more information like the abstract, or details on the speaker, or even what time and what room is it in. If you want to search again, just say search again. To move forward and back in the list, you can say previous and next.
Yeah, tell me about the Vault Room.
The Vault Room is an underground workspace for meetings, workshops and auditions. To hear about other rooms, say, what rooms are there?
Next.
You have reached the end of the sessions. You can go back or you can start over.
Start over.
Okay, what sort of session are you interested in hearing about now?
Front-end development.
I have found 8 matching sessions. Do you want to filter the list further? I can filter by day or I can filter by track. To find out about tracks, say help tracks.
Yeah,
or just say list to go through the list.
Filter by date.
What day? The conference is on Thursday or Friday, or you can filter further by saying something like Thursday afternoon.
Yeah, Thursday afternoon.
We have Twig Ninja Tactics. Would you like to know more details or the speaker or room? Or say next to hear the next item.
Next.
How about them in Drupal in 2017, A New Hope?
Cancel. So it worked. So this is one I recorded earlier in case I couldn't navigate Wi-Fi or anything like that. Don't need it. Yeah. So it's a bit gimmicky, right? What's the key message here? Well, the key message here is Drupal is your canonical source. So as with anything else that you've ever built in the past, we've always said, Drupal does integrations well, and so you only need one canonical source for all your information. And basically, this is just a repetition on that theme. So this is a screenshot from the node edit form from the DrupalSouth website, which Sparks Interactive were grateful to, were very accommodating to let me sort of get my hands on. But you can see that the responses that it read to me about Nick is a developer who's passionate about Drupal, and it had trouble pronouncing his surname, but he's had that a lot, so yeah. Some other things you probably noticed, it had trouble pronouncing Drupal, and I did go through the process of trying to get this published in the app directory so that people could actually use it on any Android device. I didn't get through the sort of the review process, and I sort of kind of ran out of time, but one of the things that did get better, so the first maybe 4 or 5 times I tried to do this, when I would say talk to DrupalSouth, it would just completely couldn't understand what I was saying. So, over time, it does actually get used to your voice. And so we got it first time there, which is great when you want to do a demo. But yeah, the long story short here is this allows you to keep using Drupal as you previously have, but then start exposing the same information to different channels and different technologies. So we're going to go through how I built this particular app. We'll do a lot of screen sharing from the actual Dialogflow interface. We will look at a little bit of code, but not much. Maybe just high level, looking at some interfaces to kind of show you that there isn't that much code involved. We will look at some site building because there is some speed up that you can do with the natural language parsing by telling Dialogflow about your content in advance. But we're going to start with some terminology. So these are the things that will probably come up a bit more in the presentation, and I'm just going to give you some explanation on what they mean. So the first thing we're going to talk about is intents. And so an intent basically is trying to map what the user said into a particular intention. So for example, if they were to say, order some pizza, well, it's clear that their intent there is that they want to order pizza. In this example, when I said, what room is that in, that mapped through to a session room intention. So this is basically trying to distinguish from the phrase that the user has said what they actually want to do. The next concept I'm going to talk about is entities. So if you're familiar with Drupal, you know about this. The Sparks guys have got it on the back of their t-shirt. And basically, it's the same thing, the same concept as you would have in Drupal. It's a collection of objects. One cool feature that Dialogflow comes with is synonyms. So you could say Docker has a synonym of container, for example. Now, context, this is an important one. So when you or I will converse as humans, we can understand the context. We know that the conversation is threaded. We can be having multiple conversations about the same thing without losing track of what we're talking about. And you can actually do that with this here. So, I said, tell me about the speaker. I didn't say, tell me about Nick Shue. So it knew that we were already talking about a particular session. For example, when I tried to trip it up by saying banana, it said, currently we are talking about, and the title of Nick's session, but I didn't understand what you meant. So we kind of retained that context. So, a classic example we could say to a music app, play me something by your favorite artist, and then give me the next song, and it would know that, you're still talking about that artist. The next concept is fulfillment. And so this is basically like your webhooks. It's the dynamic responses that fulfill, the answers to the question. So obviously I haven't pre-typed all of those things into Dialogflow, and I'm having them, when I speak to this, it speaks to Dialogflow. Dialogflow talks to the Drupal site on an endpoint. The Drupal site sends back the response, gets turned into speech, and is here. So there's a little bit of a delay in there, but what's happening there is a couple of hops. And this is the part where Drupal fits in. So they are the key terms that I want to go over. I wanted to talk a little bit now about design considerations. And so conversation is hard, and you do need to plan for this because you can quite easily find yourself in UX rabbit holes. And like I said, I've submitted this for publishing in the Assistant App Directory, and the reviewers have come back with a few things. And the main one that they're concerned about is that you have to finish every response with a question so that the person using it realizes the mic is still on, because otherwise it just sits there recording. And that's something that you didn't think about in advance. And it's not. We know when we converse naturally that I don't have to end each response to you with a question before you reply again. So that's a little bit something you have to think about a little bit differently than you would with a normal conversation. So these are the things that I think are the key things you need to think about when you're building an app like this. And one is the scope. So you'll notice when it first started, it said, I can tell you about session times, I can tell you about room times. And it told you a few examples of the sort of things that you could ask it. So it said, what sessions are there by Spark Interactive, for example. And the reason it's important to define the scope up front is otherwise people just start asking questions that we're never going to answer, and then they get frustrated. And then when they're frustrated, obviously, they're not going to come back. Personality is important, and I would argue that there wasn't much in the way of personality on this bot. It's done in a bit of a hurry. My daughter was building one of these, and it could have been named Sassy Bot because it It had a lot of smart ass from us. But yeah, you should think about personality, because if you don't make it interesting, people aren't going to come back and use it. It's got to be fun. But one tool that I've used to map this out, and this is the actual flow diagram from this app, is an open source product called Twine. And it's basically a HTML tool, but you can use it online from that URL. And it's a little bit like Wikipedia. You actually just type in the links in square brackets like you would in any wiki format, and it builds this for you automatically, and that helps you think about the flow and make sure your users don't get stuck. So you should start with a happy path. Now, of course, I went through the happy path there because I built it, and so the people that review this, they don't know anything about it. They can't see behind the scenes. They can only know by what you told it in the original help, etc. So this is where you should start with your app. You should start with a happy path, and so basically you're assuming that the user gets it straight away and they're going to follow the typical flow. But it's very important to consider the unhappy path. So you'll note that I had if you get stuck at any time, you can say help. And I had, when we're talking about, filter by track, I could say help tracks, or I could say help rooms, or I could say various utterances like that. Because us here, we realise there's 3 rooms. If you're coming into it cold, you might not know. And you should also have an option to start over. So you'll notice that at one point I said start again, and that let me go back and research. We already spoke about character. So now let's have a little bit of a look at dialog flow. Now I've got screenshots of everything in here in case I couldn't get the Wi-Fi to work, but I'm actually going to jump to the interface, and I'm going to try and control the mouse from down here. But this is the dialog flow. We can't really see this side there. It's a bit better. So this is the UI for it, and it's now owned by Google, but it's fairly user-friendly. So before, when I was speaking about intents, let's just have a look. This is going to be a bit of a tricky to jump back and forth at my first intent. So one of the intents that's probably the simplest is Tracklist here. And so the way you set it up is you start with, I probably should have brought a pointer, user says. So you say here that some of the utterances that would invoke the Tracklist intent, help tracks. What tracks are there? Show me the tracks, list the tracks, help with tracks. And I've entered 5 or so here. You can enter as many as you like. They recommend you enter about 5 to 10. And then when you click save here, you'll actually notice down the bottom corner it comes up and says machine learning training started. So it will actually take those 5 as a seed for its machine learning and extrapolate on it. So a lot of the phrases that I said weren't an exact match. So I would say things like, yeah, show me the room, or yeah, tell me about the session. That's not an exact match on any of the phrases that are in here. It actually goes off and generates machine learning based on that, teaches it to extrapolate on that. So the more you enter here, the better in terms of that training. The next thing we spoke about in the terminology was entities. So in this app, I've only got 5 entity types. I've got company. So what these entities are, they're basically, in advance, you can tell it about concepts that exist in your domain, so that when it's doing its natural language parsing, it can help to distinguish what you're actually talking about. So one of the example utterances was, what sessions are there by Sparks Interactive? So if I've told it in advance all of the possible companies that are speaking at DrupalSouth, that way, when you talk, if it can match on one of those entities, and you can also have synonyms, if it can match on that, then that gives it a better lock on what you're actually saying, because there might be some intents that talk about a company and others that don't. So if it detects a company name, it automatically helps it pick the intent faster. And so by putting those in here in advance, you help its natural language parsing do a better job. I'm just going to switch back to my slides. Yeah, now one thing I didn't mention there is that some of these entities are dynamic. So you could notice all of these are coming, these sort of correlate with the company field on the Drupal site. So that's from Nick's session. But you'll also notice that some of them are a little bit more fixed, such as the tracks. They've kind of hard-coded those into the system. So I'll talk a little bit more about how the Drupal integration works between there and here, because obviously I didn't go and type in all those company names. But the next thing I want to talk about is intent slots. Now these are the arguments that will fill in the conversation. So you noticed before I said I wanted to know about front-end development, or I said what sessions are there about Docker on Friday morning. So if we have a look at the intents, and I look at the intent called session info, you'll notice that the utterances have got some highlighted phrases in there. And these are just arguments in a programming terminology. So variations on these would work. What sessions by Dave Sparks. And that would work with any of the speakers, because before I have an entity called speaker. What beginner sessions are there? So that's looking at the level of the session. Are there sessions by Spark Interactive? And these are all variations on that. You notice it'll even accept a single keyword, PHP. So yeah, if you were just to throw a word at it, it'll hook this up. And so down here, it identifies what these particular slots are made up of. So keyword was one of the entities that I had defined before. Presentation level, speaker and company, they're all the same. But there's a couple in there that are system slots. So you'll notice a date and a time period. So when I said what front-end development sessions are there on Thursday afternoon, Thursday is a date. It automatically recognizes that. Afternoon is a time period. And so there's support for city names, people's names, lots of built-in sort of system entities that kind of have a context that most you and I would understand. Thing to note, you can make these required. None of them are, but if I was to make this keyword required, then I can actually put some prompts in here so that if they were to say what sessions are there, but they didn't provide a keyword, then it would say, oh, what are you interested in? Or we have a lot of sessions, what sort of topics interest you? And it'll just pick one of these at random. So the example apps that they have on here, they've got, for example, a pizza ordering app. And so to order pizza, you need to know where it needs to go, what time, what toppings, what sort of pizza, etc. And so you can say to it, pizza, and some of the requirements, some of the slots are required. So it will say to you, all right, what sort of base do you want? What toppings do you want? And where do I deliver it to? But if you were to say in one single phrase, send me a pepperoni pizza to, XYZ 123 Street, it can pass out from that the pepperoni, etc., and not ask you those questions. But if you don't provide that context or those slots, it can actually ask you for them. I'm just going to jump back to my slides. Now, one thing I wanted to point out here is this use webhook that's on the bottom of the slots. I think that's what I was talking about, yeah. So down the bottom here, I'll turn that back off. I've got this use webhook, and I'll come back to that in a moment. So basically, that's just telling it that for this intent, there's no responses here. Ticking this webhook makes it get the responses from your fulfillment, which is when we get to Drupal. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was tracking context. So as you saw before when we had the conversation, it could keep track of, we were talking about Nick's session, for example, or we were talking about front-end development on Friday afternoon. And so in these intents, you can set outgoing context, and I'll just find a good one. So at the top here, we've got a track of context. So the top row is the input context, and the bottom row is an output context. So before, when it said to me, I have found 8 sessions about front-end development on Thursday afternoon, would you like to filter by date? I said by date, and so that invoked this intent. And when this intent isn't available unless I've already got the session info input context. So for example, if I turned it on, said talk to DrupalSouth, and I said by date, this wouldn't fire because I hadn't spoken to it about session info first. So that input context, if I didn't have the session info input context, this intent wouldn't match. So you'll notice on the way out as an output context, I retain the session info context. And these numbers here are for how long we should retain them for. Because obviously, if I was talking about PHP some time ago and then I start talking about front-end development, I don't want to retain that original PHP. So you can set an input context which will determine whether this particular intent is valid, because obviously you don't want to say by date if you haven't even started the conversation, but you can also set an output context to keep track of where we've been. So in this instance, I've set a session info too many, and so that way it knows that I've got to the point where I had, so in the back end, if you've had more than 5 matches, it says, oh, actually I found 8, do you want to filter? Whereas if it only found 3, like the first one we found for Nick's session, it just said, okay, I found a session called, Sailing with Kubernetes, because you're not going to ask it, I've only found 1 session, do you want to hear about the session? You just start telling them. So you can keep track of the kind of flow through the conversation. So the next area of the interface I want to show is the fulfillment. And this, again, is pretty straightforward. You just put the URL to your Drupal site. Now, I'll talk about where this part comes from. But basically, you put that in and you hit save, and then that little tick box comes available, and you can start serving responses from the Drupal side of things. I just want to jump back to my slides. Right, so this is where we get to integrations. So I demonstrated working with the Google Assistant app, but Dialogflow has much more than that. So if you've seen some of the blog posts that we've been doing about this, you will know that Ricky, who's up the back, wrote an integration for our website for it, which basically just talks to the Dialogflow API over JavaScript and is done in a messaging chatbot format, but it's going through the same thing here. We have built a previous next bot that we put in our Slack channel, and we could just have fun talking to it, and it would answer with responses from the previous next website. But basically, all of these are one-click kind of integrations, and one you'll notice down the bottom, second right, is Amazon Alexa. So these two are obviously competing products, the Home and the Echo, but you can actually export from Dialogflow in a format that you can import straight into Alexa. So I think that's why Dialogflow is kind of the superior product, just because rather than being focused on a single solution, you can get integration with all of these, and including the competitor. And then the final area here I want to show you is training, and this is pretty fun. Basically, you can see the conversations that people had. So someone asked it to tell me about the vote. Now, that wasn't me. So basically, someone asked it to tell me about the vote, and it thought they wanted to know about a speaker. So it must have matched vote close to someone's name. And I can actually say, okay, no, that wasn't the right thing. It should have been the fallback intent, which is not showing up here. Actually, I can just delete that, and it just falls to the fallback intent. So you can actually train it as you go. No, that's the vote. So someone's asked it about the vote. So this would be, Google reviewed it yesterday. So this will be them reviewing it. Yeah. It could have been, yes. Could have meant to be the vote, true. Yes. But the good thing about this is you can go in here and actually train it, because obviously, yeah, I mean, someone said to it, I love you and potato, right? Like, you can't know in advance what people are going to say, and you can come in here. So, for example, with the previous next one of these, I think Owen asked it, are there any good waves? And so then we added a feature for it to respond with, oh, yeah, ask Nick Santa Maria, he's down the surf coast. You can find out a way people are interacting with your device here and improve on it. So, yeah, it's pretty powerful. It does have a small talk feature where you can have it respond for things like, I love you. I think you may have seen that in the sidebar. So the previous next bot has small talk integration, and you have the opportunity, if you have the time, to put in responses for these 1,000,001 questions. You can't have that with Google Assistant integration. You have to have that turned off. That's just one of their rules. But if it's just a message bot, like a Slack or Twitter bot or whatever, you can actually have it integrate with Smalltalk. And it does have stuff for like, you know, I love you, etc. And you can put in some funny responses. And this is where you can introduce a bit of that personality. Okay, so I think that's about all I wanted to cover in that UI. Yeah, one last thing, testing. So the neat thing about this is on the side, as you're building it, you can start testing it. So is it Spark Interactive? Okay, put it in right. Yeah, well, you can test it on the side there. I don't know why that's not working. It's gone into the, you'll notice here, this is probably a good explanation of the context system. It's gone into the fallback, and then it's gone into the fallback, which means, hey, we're really on a really bad path here. And if I was to type like bananas or something here, it's like, wait, 3-time loser. Hang on a minute. Sorry, I think you might just be trolling me now, right? So you can keep track of how far people have gone off the path. Anyway, that's a bit of an aside. Okay, so the Drupal stuff. What modules are we running on the DrupalSouth site? So we're running a module called Chatbot API. This is a generic API module, which is one of those ones that developers love, and it's basically just provides plumbing. There are integration modules for Alexa, this API.ai dialog flow, and I think for a couple of other bot frameworks, but basically it just provides just some common API stuff. Sorry, I have to go back. One thing it does provide is a submodule called Chatbot API Entities, which is, when I get to in a moment, that's how you kind of tell Dialogflow in advance that these are the valid entities in my site, which help with its natural language passing. API.ai Webhook, it's really great when someone reserves the module namespace API.ai Webhook, and then the people go and change the name of their product to Dialogflow. So we're stuck with the old name, but this one provides the implementations for Chatbot API module that make it work with Dialogflow, formerly known as API.ai. So intent plugins. The way the whole module works is just with plugins. So if you've built a plugin for Drupal 8, you'll know how plugins work. It's a class, it lives in a folder, it's got a particular namespace, and it implements a particular interface. Same as blocks, formatters. You know, plugins are kind of everywhere in Drupal 8. I have got a code sample here, and I just wanted to show a couple of things. And I've actually got a better code sample in my slides that's less overwhelming. And I don't know if you can see that. Basically, you need to extend from intent plugin base, which is a base class, as most plugins have. And you need one method called process. And when you're in that process method, you have access to this request, which is the incoming request. And you have to set an intent response on this response. And if you need to get those parameters that we talked about before, like keyword, presentation level, etc., you can just call this request get intent slot. So this is a cut down version of the code I had over here, just focusing on the important parts being the request and the response, and this get intent slot. The actual implementation for tell me about, you know, one of the intents is like tell me about Dave Sparks, who happens to be presenting the session. It's a little bit convoluted because, unfortunately, the DrupalSouth site has speakers in a single text field, and so if there's 2 speakers, it has to work out whether you're talking about 1 speaker or 2 speakers. So there's a couple of different paths here, and there's also a path for those people that didn't provide a bio. So we're just using the normal entity query process, and we're trying to find a session with a speaker name like the incoming value. And so if we couldn't find anything, we say, well, we didn't receive any bio information. Or we say, sure, here is their bio information. Or we say, okay, so-and-so is co-presenting, and unfortunately the bio field has both their bios in it, so we have to say, well, you know, here's the bio information for both presenters. Or if we can't work it out, we just say, I can't find that speaker. So, yeah, it's, I mean, I don't want to show you too much code, but it's basically the same Drupal stuff that you see time and time again. Let me see if I can get back to my slides, yeah. Right, so pushing entities now. So before you saw I had, and I'm just going to zoom back out so I can see how much time I'm taking. Yeah. So before you saw that I had pushed like the keywords and the companies and the speaker names, etc. Obviously, I didn't want to go typing those in. And the real power of Drupal, obviously, is you maintain something in one place and it's updated everywhere. So if you're maintaining a list of keywords or a list of speakers in your Drupal site, you don't want to go and then have to type it into Dialogflow. And that's where that Chatbot API entities submodule comes in. And basically, it gives you this. I'm going to get there. It gives you the ability to have these entity collections. So these are just like any other site building you would do in Drupal. And I'm just going to edit the keyword one. And basically, I just say, OK, I want to send keywords, so taxonomy, term, vocabulary keywords. I want to use the term query handler, and I'll come back to handlers in a minute. But basically, if all you want to push is the label of your entities, so the node title or the taxonomy name or the user's name, you shouldn't need to worry about these. And I want to push it to API.ai, and I want to push it into a remote collection called keyword. And basically, you do that, you hit save, and then every time someone updates something, we put something into a queue, and when cron runs, it goes off and sends the updated collection to API.ai, and you don't have to worry about it. Now, I did mention that by default, that these here will take care of handling, pushing the labels for your entities, so the term name or the node title. But one thing you'll notice here with the DrupalSouth side is that the speaker names are actually a field on the node. They're not the title of the node. So, I mean, if you were designing it with this in mind, you would have probably made a speaker a taxonomy term, and then you could make an entity reference, and you could reference multiple speakers. But you can actually also retrofit this into an existing content model. So here where speaker name is a string and company name is a string. And the way you basically do that is with the notion of these query and push handlers. And so I'm going to show you some more code here because we've got a bit of time. So basically, they're both plugins again. And I'm going to zoom in. Whoa. And so you implement a plugin, you extend from a base class, and you have to implement the query method. And all that query method has to do is return an array of entities, nodes, users, whatever. So, for example, in the case of the speaker query, all I do there is return every session that is published. And now the session title isn't the speaker name, obviously, and that's where the push handlers come in. So they have an opportunity to modify what is sent. And so this is a push handler, and basically you get a list of entities, and you have to put them into this value pair format. And so basically in this push handler for the speaker, for example, I would just get the value out of the speaker field for each of those sessions, and then make sure we only send unique values, because obviously some people are doing 2 sessions. Okay, so we're going well for time. Just to recap, we did a demo, and it worked, yes. We talked about the terminology. I showed you the Dialogflow UI, and we also talked about the Drupal side of things. Yeah, so go out and make something cool. My name is Lee Rowlands. My username on Drupal.org and most places on the internet is LA Rowlands. So if you build something cool with this, let me know, because this stuff's really fun for me. I just wanted to say some thanks. The DrupalSouth team, they gave me code. They gave me access to the site's code base. They let me push modules up. They merged my giant pull request with all the intent plugins. And particularly I want to thank Dewa there, who got me set up, deployed the code for me. So thanks very much. And also Gambry, so he started a lot of this chat API stuff. This is the classic example of what Nick calls conference-driven development. I proposed this session knowing what you could do with Dialogflow, but not what you could do with Drupal. The chatbot entities, endpoint thing, all the pushing, the query handles, all that was written as a proof of concept that you could actually do this. So Gambry was the maintainer of the chatbot API and the API webhook, and he accepted my feature requests or my patches to add all that stuff to it, and ended up making me the maintainer. So I'm eternally grateful for him. And of course, I've got to put some image credits in there. Yeah, that's the end. We've got time for questions. We have a microphone over here that Nicole's got. So
Hello.
hey, Simon.
Brilliant. My question would be, as a naive person who thinks about the future and AI, does it feel to you like there's not as much AI in some of that? Like when you put in sparks, I mean, it's a plural of spark.
Yes. So it depends on whether it's probably misconfiguration on my behalf, but in the entity configuration, I haven't turned on allow automatic expansion. So if you turn that on, and also I haven't defined any synonyms, but if I do both of those, then the machine learning should come in. I haven't got any. I'm looking at the previous Nextbot one here, I think. Yeah, I am. Yeah. So I just switched to a different project. If we look at the skill set, for example, this is where we've got a synonyms field on our taxonomy, and so we push. UX is also user experience, also designers is also IA. So we're kind of giving it some more seeds there. But yeah, it's still early. But I've found that the utterance or the user says it's really good on expanding, but not so much yet on the entities. I guess it would depend on how familiar your customers are with your products as well. So with the pizza toppings one, for example, it's a little bit, they're kind of real words, whereas with a lot of companies they're not. Like they're kind of made up words, and it does struggle with things like you heard it pronounced Drupal wrong. It took a while for the machine learning to actually, originally I had it called DrupalSouth Auckland, and it kept thinking it was Oakland. And so when you actually submit the app, you have to give them a recording of how you would say it in a natural language, and then they must do some magic on their end, because the first 8 or 9 times I said DrupalSouth Auckland, it was DrupalSouth Oakland, and it's obviously gotten better because it got it first time then. Even on my demo video that I had, it got it wrong. So it gets better over time, but in terms of do we do any of the machine learning? No, it's all a black box in behind what happens there.
Hey, I'm just wondering if I wanted to get started on this, do I need one of those Google Mini devices? Is it possible to use the phones?
If you have the Google Assistant app on your Android, you don't need this. My colleagues will testify that I'm a bit of a tinfoil hat. And so not only would I not install Google Assistant app on my phone, I even set up a new Google account just to interact with this thing. To use the Google Assistant app, you need to turn on device history, which browsing history, location history, and audio history. So it's we've sort of been workshopping this as technologies for clients, and at this stage we feel that those things on a phone people are unlikely to turn on, whereas the home device, where there's less concerns around privacy, it's not moving, so the location one is a big one. The location history actually creates a map of everywhere you've been that you can see in your Google account, and I don't know if I'm the only one that's freaked out by that, but so the home one we think is probably more likely to get adoption than the on the phone. But I'm a bit old, so maybe younger people will be less concerned about privacy. But yeah. No, you can use the simulator, or sorry, you'll notice I've got a tab open here. So this didn't pass the publishing process. It didn't run out of time, but you actually have I can't see the screen here. A simulator in actions on Google where you can talk to it as though I'm running Firefox, so the mic's not available. But if you had this in Chrome, you can actually talk to it through their simulator and without the device. But obviously, this is a little more cool than just talking to my laptop. Yeah. Hey.
It's good to hear that your accent causes issues as well. Isn't this an incredibly frustrating way to interface with a machine?
Like I said, it's a little gimmicky, but it's pretty cool. And I think that, I mean, there was a whole panel discussion on these kind of devices on Grew and Transfer, which is a TV program in Australia this week. And I think the conclusion they came to there is it's still in the early adopter phase, but by default, most of us that are here at this session will fall into that category as early adopters. So we're the ones that help iron out the kinks. You know, it needs someone to go first. And I think, as with what Michael said earlier, you know, this community is very powerful. So having someone in the community playing with it means, you know, we all get dragged along together. So, you know, most of those technologies that he talked about, you know, not everyone's involved in them, but as a community, we have experts in them. And so I think it will get better. And I think there will come a time where these kind of things are ubiquitous in the home. It may not be in 5 years, it may not be in 10 years, but I think that someone in the Drupal community has to be out front of the wave so that we all get, you know, the ability to ride it. Yeah. Hey,
So,
Michael.
one of the things that is surprising to me is like how much you like. We hear about API.ai and like we heard before, it sounds like it does everything magically, but there's still a lot you have to teach the system. How long would you say did it take you now for that app to actually go through the UI and configure all that stuff?
I'd say 8 to 10 hours,
Okay.
including the plugins on the code side. A lot of the code stuff, I didn't show the intents that are to do with the session stuff, but you know, in terms of design, I built like a service called Session Lister or Session Querier or something like that, that basically could take a request and return back a list of nodes. So there were a lot of intents in there, but most of them were just variations on a theme. You know, like what room, what time, you know, what speaker, what's the abstract, etc. So yeah, the first time around probably took a bit longer than that, and getting it set up in the front end part of the site, Ricky, would probably be another same amount of time again. Yeah. So I still think that's not a huge investment of time. And I think that we can't know in advance all the possible uses for this. I mean, you people in the room will know whether this will align with your client projects or your particular, you know, if you're a product owner with your particular offering. This felt like a good match for the conference to build this, but there's a lot of other things out there. I know that I was talking to some people involved in the NDIS, which is the National Disability Insurance Scheme in Bundaberg, where I'm from, and they were sort of saying there's huge potential in this for people that can't use a keyboard, can't use a mouse, and particularly for elderly. There's a large aged population in Bundaberg that are tech phobia because they don't want to touch screen or they don't want to use a keyboard, but everyone knows how to interact over voice, and so I thought there was a valid point there that, you know, this does open some doors for those people that may be less inclined to interact with the machine through a keyboard or a touch screen. Yeah.
And towards like a second question, do you know if it has any understanding of multilingual? Because like I saw now in the code, there is some English there. Can it handle multiple languages at the same time?
I don't know, but I knew that button was there, yes. So we can add, there's not a huge set of languages there, but there's more in the coming, I assume, yeah.
Cool. I think we've just got to cut it here. Thank you, Lee, for
Thanks.
the session. If you have more questions, just ask them in the break.
Yeah.